As the FBI continues to investigate the killers in the San Bernardino terror attack, there are new questions about how Tashfeen Malik was able to enter the United States. The New York Times reports she had made questionable comments on social media before she moved to America. Malik and her husband, Syed Farook, killed 14 and wounded more than 20 people in a pre-planned attack. CBS News senior national security analyst Juan Zarate joins me now by phone from Washington to go through the implications. Juan, according to a new report, Malik spoke openly on social media about her support for violent jihad and her desire to be a part of it. But none of those postings were discovered when she applied for a K-1 fiancé visa. So how is that possible?
It's a great question, Vlad, and a troubling data point that has emerged. What it reflects is that the visa vetting program, though it is robust, may not be up to speed with the 21st century. That is to say, there may not be the right protocols or practices or maybe even policies that allow for the look at social media and postings and communications of applicants as part of the vetting process. It doesn't make sense. It obviously is counterintuitive. We should be looking at any and all relevant information tied to an individual applicant. But it may be that the social media dimension of this and the communications of applicants is falling through the cracks. And it may be a matter of policy and practice, but it also may be a function of resources where authorities may just not have enough resources to be trolling through the social media accounts of all applicants. But this is a major deficit and no doubt will raise concerns in Congress as well as in the public about whether or not our vetting is actually modernized enough to deal with 21st century communications.
So, and what's interesting, Juan, is that Malik was not identified as a threat, even despite the fact that she had these numerous postings on social media. But she was interviewed at the U.S. Embassy in Pakistan. She was vetted by 5 different government agencies. So why didn't she stand out to some of those investigators?
It's a good question. I think she was probably very good and sort of traditional in her interviews. I don't have access to the interview notes, obviously, but I'm imagining she didn't raise any red flags and that she probably didn't talk about violent jihad. She probably didn't talk about what some of her violent aspirations may have been like. And she probably just did the bare minimum to get through the process. And there may not have been any red flags that would have attached to her, and that may have led to less scrutiny than otherwise would have been given to somebody who was slightly suspect or may have had connections of concern. But it does raise the question of whether or not in the application process the U.S. government is looking at all the available information and communications around an applicant. That's a heavily it's resource-demanded question and process, but it's one that obviously we're going to have to look at. And certainly it should have raised some red flags in this case. Even if that speech is allowable in theory, it should have raised concerns in the visa vetting context.
Juan, before I let you go, the president delivered a statement today from the Pentagon, and he talked about the numerous advances the United States is making in the fight against ISIS. He listed some specific leaders of that terror group that have been taken out by the United States. He talked about the more than 9,000 airstrikes that have been conducted on the terror group. He also mentioned the fact that 40% of the territory that ISIS had controlled has now been taken back from them. What did you make of the president's comments?
Well, I think it was important for him to have this meeting and to give this speech, because he needs to demonstrate that he's not only aware of the threat, but that he's leading the charge against the Islamic State. That said, I think we've got a problem here between all the advances the president has laid out and the reality that the Islamic State continues to expand its reach and its influence. And I think the fact that you've had the Sinai attacks, the Beirut attacks, claimed attacks in Bangladesh, the attacks in Paris, obviously the inspired attacks in San Bernardino, all at a time when we were supposed to be diminishing their reach, suggests that there's a disconnect. And I think the one key problem for the president is this question of time and urgency. Is time on our side or not? And I think the president has a long-term game plan. He thinks we're winning. The real question is the enemy adapting quicker than our efforts are diminishing their reach? And it's not clear that we're winning. And I think that's the real challenge for the president, despite the numbers and despite the list of advantages and progress that he's laid out.
Juan, is it fair, though, to make a distinction between the advances that the United States and the coalition is having on the ground militarily vis-a-vis those who might be radicalized to carry out acts of terror here in the United States, the way we saw with these individuals in San Bernardino? In other words, could we ultimately, the president's goal is to completely wipe away ISIS from Syria and Iraq. If that is achieved, could we still see some attacks in the West by people who are motivated by the ISIS ideology?
Absolutely. And I think there are three degrees of this problem, Vlad. One is we may be diminishing certain territory and resources for the group, but they still are entrenched, as the president said, in key capitals and urban environments: Fallujah, Ramadi, Raqqa, Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq. They have foothold in Libya, the town of Sirte. They're in parts of Derna and Benghazi. And they are having and establishing footholds in places like Afghanistan and even Yemen. And so the problem is, as we diminish in certain parts, we retain the hold in others. And secondly, they are expanding well beyond Syria and Iraq, to your point about the reach. And third, they're inspiring with their narrative, with their ideology, and with their sense of inevitable creation of a caliphate, the idea of inspiring actors around the world to attack in place. And so in those three areas, you have a real problem with ISIS continuing to inspire and expand its reach, even though the president is right in explaining the progress we've made on the ground.
Juan Zarate, Juan, as always, we thank you for your analysis.
Thank you, Vlad. I appreciate it.